The wind moved slow across the desert plain, carrying red dust that glowed under the setting sun. The ranch stood alone, strong and silent, miles from the nearest town. Cattle grazed near the fence line while a tired rancher named Luke Carson leaned against the barn rail. He had worked since dawn, and the day had been long and hot. He was a man of few words, known by everyone around for his quiet ways and honest work. He had lost his family to fever years ago, and after that he never smiled much again. That evening, as he poured water into the horse trough, he heard something strange. A soft sound, half whisper, half cry. He looked toward the slope behind the barn and saw movement near the rocks. Luke reached for his rifle out of habit, not out of fear, and stepped closer. The sound came again. When he reached the shade of the rocks, he saw her, an Apache girl, young and thin, half collapsed on the ground. Her clothes were torn, her feet covered in dust. Her black hair hung loose, and her hands shook as she tried to rise. Luke froze for a moment. In those days, tensions between settlers and the Apache were still high. He had seen raids, lost cattle, and even friends to fighting, but there was no weapon in her hands, only fear. She looked up at him with dark eyes, wide and uncertain, and whispered something in broken English. "Please, no hurt. I walk many days, no food, no water." Luke slowly lowered his rifle and knelt beside her. Her lips were dry, her breathing weak. Without a word, he lifted her up light as a feather and carried her toward the ranch house. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of hay and smoke. He placed her near the hearth and brought water from the barrel. She drank like someone who hadn't tasted life in days. When he offered her bread, she took it with both hands, tears slipping down her face. For hours, she slept. Luke sat near the table, mending a rope, but his eyes kept moving toward her. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, with a quiet strength even in her sleep. Her face was soft but proud, as if she belonged to a people who did not bow easily. He didn't know what had brought her here, whether she had run away, been captured, or lost, but it was clear she had no one left. When she woke again, it was night. The fire flickered low. She looked around, confused, until she saw him sitting near the window. He didn't move, didn't speak. Finally, she said softly, "You saved me." "Why?" Luke shrugged. "You needed help." She studied him, the way his hands were rough and his shoulders strong. "You not hate my people?" Luke shook his head slowly. "Hate don't bring back the dead." For a moment she said nothing, only watched the fire. Then with quiet resolve she spoke again. "My name Nayeli. My village, gone. Soldiers come, many die. I run." Luke's jaw tightened. He had seen what war left behind. Burned homes, lost souls, silence where laughter once lived. "You can rest here," he said at last. "Ain't no one will harm you." Days passed. Nayeli helped where she could, feeding the animals, fetching water, sweeping the porch. She moved softly, spoke little, but Luke noticed how she watched everything carefully, learning fast. She cooked simple meals and tended the small garden behind the house. He tried to pay her with coin, but she refused. "No," she said, "I stay. I work." As summer deepened, the desert heat grew harsh. Luke kept to his work and Nayeli stayed close, her quiet presence easing the loneliness he had carried for years. At night, when coyotes howled in the distance, she would sit by the door and hum an old song, one that seemed older than the stars. One evening, a storm rolled over the desert. The wind howled through the fences and lightning cracked across the sky. The horses kicked in their stalls. Luke rushed to secure the barn doors, but the wind tore one loose. Before he could reach it, Nayeli ran out barefoot into the rain. She helped him hold the door, the storm whipping her hair across her face. Together they fought the wind until it finally passed, and then they stood drenched, breathing hard, looking at each other through the rain. For the first time, Luke smiled. She smiled back, small and soft, but it was enough to change something between them. That night, they sat by the fire to dry their clothes. Nayeli spoke of her people, of the canyons, the songs, the ways of the old tribes. Luke listened, quiet and thoughtful. "You have no fear," he said. She looked at him and shook her head. "Fear makes heart weak. My father say love make it strong." Luke looked into the flames. "Maybe your father was right." Weeks turned into months. Word spread through nearby towns that Apache camps had been attacked again. Some ranchers began arming themselves, suspicious of anyone different. One afternoon, a man named Roy Thompson rode up the hill, a neighbor, loud and rude. He saw Nayeli carrying water from the well and sneered. "Luke," he called, "you keeping one of them here?" "You gone soft?" Luke didn't answer. He walked closer, his voice low and steady. "She works here. That's all you need to know." Roy spat on the ground. "You better send her away. Folks won't like it. Ain't safe." Luke's eyes hardened. "She stays." Roy glared, muttered a curse, and rode off. Niley stood silent, eyes downcast. Luke turned toward her. "Don't mind him," he said. But she only whispered, "They hate what they don't know." That night Luke couldn't sleep. He thought of her words, of the danger she faced just by being near him. Yet when he looked at her asleep near the fire, her face peaceful, he knew he couldn't send her away. As days passed, she became part of the ranch. Not as a servant, not as a guest, but as someone who belonged. They worked side by side, spoke little but understood much. Luke noticed how her laughter came easier now, how she hummed as she brushed the horses. He found himself listening for that sound every morning. Then one quiet evening the world changed again. The sky glowed red with sunset and the air was warm and still. Niley stood near the porch holding a folded blanket she had sewn herself. Luke was fixing a fence when she walked over and stood beside him. Her voice was calm but full of meaning. "Luke," she said, "you give me food, roof, kindness. You save me. I have nothing to give. But my heart and my word." He looked up, puzzled. "What word?" She met his eyes. "I will bear you a son." Luke froze. He dropped the tool in his hand, unsure if he heard right. "What?" he said softly. Nayeli didn't look away. "In my tribe, when women give promise, it means she see future. You good man, strong, kind, you alone too long. You deserve family. I give you that." Luke stood silent, the air thick between them. He wanted to speak, but no words came. He had lived years believing his life was over, that love, warmth, or hope would never return. Yet here was this young woman standing before him with a courage that left him shaken. The wind moved softly through the grass. Luke finally spoke, his voice low. "You don't owe me anything," she smiled faintly. "It not owe. It gift." He looked into her eyes, saw the truth in them, and for the first time in years he didn't know how to refuse. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon. The desert turned gold, and in that quiet moment something new began, something neither of them could name yet. The sun rose over the dry hills, painting the sky with soft orange light. Luke woke early, as he always did, but something in him felt different. The night before kept echoing in his mind. Nayeli's words, quiet yet firm. "I will bear you a son." It wasn't a plea, it was a promise, and it carried a weight he could not shake off. He went about his chores silently. The horses needed water, the fence needed mending, but his thoughts stayed with her. Nayeli was inside, sweeping the floor and humming softly. When he looked through the doorway, she smiled, shy but sure of herself. Luke's heart ached a little. She had given him more than comfort. She had given him hope he thought was long gone. For days, nothing was said between them about that night. They worked side by side as always. She made meals, tended the chickens, and sang to the wind when the sun went down. But Luke noticed how she looked at him. Not as a stranger, not even as a rescuer, but as someone she had chosen. And that changed everything. Then came the trouble. One hot afternoon, Roy Thompson returned with 2 other men. Dust rose behind their horses as they rode hard toward Luke's ranch. Luke was fixing the corral gate when he saw them. Nayeli was washing clothes by the well. She looked up as the men stopped near her, their faces hard and full of judgment. Roy called out, "You still keeping her here, Luke? You know what folks are saying. You gone crazy letting an Apache girl live under your roof." Luke straightened slowly, his eyes cold. "She works here. She stays." The second man, a wiry ranch hand with a cruel smile, spat in the dirt. "You planning to marry her or just shame yourself?" Luke's jaw tightened. He took a step forward. "That's enough," Roy laughed. "You think you're some kind of hero, Luke? You know they'll come for you next. Sheriff's already talking about cleaning the valley of outsiders. You best send her away before someone gets hurt." Luke didn't answer. His silence spoke louder than words. The men finally turned their horses and rode off, muttering curses. Niley stood still, her hands trembling slightly, though her eyes stayed strong. That night she sat by the fire, quiet and thoughtful. Luke poured her a cup of coffee and sat across from her. For a long time neither spoke. Then Nayeli said softly, "They will not stop." Luke nodded slowly. "I know. You could send me away," she whispered. "It would make your life easier." Luke looked into the fire. Maybe, but I'd never forgive myself. You're safe here, and you're not going anywhere. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. Then I stay, not a stranger. He met her gaze, and in that silent promise, the distance between them disappeared. From that day forward, Nayeli was no longer a guest or a helper. She was his family. She began wearing a simple dress he bought from town, and she moved through the ranch like it was her home. Luke built her a small garden behind the house, and she filled it with desert flowers and herbs she remembered from her village. As time passed, word spread through the valley. Some ranchers kept their distance, others whispered behind his back, but Luke didn't care. His world was the land, the sky, and the woman who had brought peace back into his house. Then came another test. One night, a rider approached from the east, a young deputy from town. He knocked on Luke's door with his hat in hand. "Mr. Carson," he said, "the sheriff says there's talk of Apache raids again. Some folks think you're helping one. You might want to come to town and explain." Luke's eyes hardened. "There's nothing to explain. She's my responsibility." The deputy hesitated. "Then you best keep your rifle close. Not everyone in town's got patience." When he left, Luke locked the doors and loaded his shotgun. Nayeli stood near the window, her hands folded tight. "They come for us?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "If they come, they'll find me first." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, watching him sit guard at the door, his rifle across his knees. He looked tired but calm. She moved quietly to him and whispered, "You fight for me." He looked up. "I fight for what's right." She knelt beside him, her hand brushing his arm. "In my people's way, when man protects woman, he already make her his wife." Luke smiled faintly. "Then I guess it's done." Weeks passed and no one came. Slowly, life returned to normal. Nayeli began painting symbols on the barn wall, shapes of the sun, the wind, and the river. Luke asked her what they meant. She said they were blessings, signs of strength, family, and new life. By the end of summer, her belly began to round gently. She worked slower now, and Luke took over most of the chores. When he saw her sitting by the porch in the evenings, sewing tiny clothes with careful hands, something inside him softened completely. He built a cradle himself, carving each piece of wood by hand. One evening he asked quietly, "You sure you want this life, Nayeli? The world won't make it easy for our child." She looked up at him, her dark eyes glowing in the firelight. "Our child will be both, strong like you, brave like my people. No one can take that away." Luke nodded. Her words settled in his heart like a prayer. When the first snow came, the ranch turned silent and white. Nayeli grew weaker with the cold, but Luke stayed by her side, bringing firewood, making soup, keeping her warm. The night she went into labor, the wind screamed outside, and Luke's heart pounded harder than it ever had. Hours passed before the small cry of a newborn broke through the storm. Nayeli held the baby close, tears running down her face. "He will carry your name," she whispered. "He is the bridge between two worlds." Luke looked at the child, small, strong, and breathing life into the quiet room. And for the first time in years, his heart felt whole. He kissed Nayeli's forehead. "You kept your promise, but peace didn't last long." Word reached the valley that soldiers were moving again, chasing survivors from broken camps. When they reached the nearby ridge, Luke knew danger was near. He told Nayeli to stay hidden in the cellar while he went to meet them. The soldiers demanded to search his property, saying they had reports of an Apache hiding there. Luke stood firm. "Ain't no one here but my family," he said. The officer sneered. "Family? You mean that Apache woman?" Luke's grip on his rifle tightened. "She's my wife." For a long moment, no one moved. The soldiers looked at each other. Then the officer finally nodded and turned away. "We got no orders to fight a husband protecting his wife. You best keep to yourself, Carson." When they rode off, Luke returned to the cellar and found Nayeli holding their child close. She looked up at him, relief flooding her face. He smiled faintly. "They're gone," she whispered. "You stood for me." He touched her cheek gently. "I told you. You're home." Years passed. The boy grew strong, running barefoot through the grass, his laughter echoing across the ranch. He had his father's calm eyes and his mother's spirit. The people who once whispered against them stopped talking. They saw the family work hard, live right, and bring kindness wherever they went. Slowly, respect replaced judgment. One quiet evening, Luke sat on the porch with Nayeli beside him. their son playing with a wooden horse in the dust. The sun dipped low and the desert glowed gold again, the same way it had the day she first arrived. Nellie leaned against him and said softly, "You gave me peace." He looked at her and smiled. "You gave me life," she laughed gently. "No, I gave you, son. Life was already in you." Luke watched the horizon, where the sky met the hills, and felt something deep and good settle in his chest. The world had been cruel, but love had built a place stronger than hate. The wind moved softly through the ranch grass. The horses grazed near the fence, and the boys' laughter carried far. In that golden light, the rancher who once lived alone now had everything he had ever lost: a home, a family, and a promise kept by an Apache girl who had the courage to love him when no one else would.